Gideon Dray cut the rawhide rope and caught her before she hit dirt. Her knees buckled anyway, dead weight in his arms for one sharp second, and then she came alive, snatching a broken mesquite splinter and ramming it toward his throat like a cornered cat. "Easy," he said, holding still on purpose. "I'm not here to finish what they started." Her eyes, dark, bright, furious, flicked to the thick black mark smeared across her cheekbone, then back to him as if he'd painted it himself. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." Gideon lowered his hands, slow enough that she could follow every inch of movement. He set his knife on the ground between them and slid it away with 2 fingers. "You want to stab me. You'll have your chance," he said. "But if you bleed out first, that mark won't matter. Can I look at you?" The woman's mouth tightened. She stared at him like she was weighing a lie against a bullet. Then she gave the smallest nod, barely there, but it was permission. He didn't touch her face. He didn't reach for her wrists. He shifted his body sideways, giving her room to run if she could, and lifted his canteen into view like an offering. "Water," he said. She didn't take it. Her gaze cut past him to the stretch of land behind toward the low ridge where the tracks were fresh, where boot prints and dragged rope had scarred the dirt. The men who'd left her hanging weren't far. Gideon could feel it in his bones the way he could feel thunder in a bad tooth. "Drink," he said again, softer. "Or spit it out on me if you need to. I won't mind." That earned a flicker and almost laugh that died before it reached her eyes. She took the canteen with a hand that shook, pressed the mouth to her lips, and swallowed like each pull hurt. When she handed it back, her fingers brushed his knuckles, and she flinched as if his skin burned. Gideon kept his voice steady. "You're hurt." The woman's stare hardened. "No." He glanced down anyway. Rope bites circled her wrists in angry rings. Blood darkened the front of her torn blouse, or something, maybe a knife point. Maybe a bullet had kissed too close. Beneath the dried mess, her breathing wasn't right. Shallow, guarded. "Name," he said. Silence. "I'm Gideon Dray," he went on. "This is my land. I don't run people off with rope. If you tell me your name, I'll know what to call you while I save your life." Her jaw clenched. She looked like a woman who'd learned long ago that names were hooks. Finally she rasped, "Soldad?" The word sounded like a blade pulled from a sheath. Gideon didn't ask if it was the one she'd been born with. He didn't ask who'd given it to her. He took what she offered because that was the only way a person like her survived, giving little, testing, watching. "All right, Soldad," he said. "Can you stand?" She tried, stubborn as a mule. Pain stole the strength from her legs as she pitched forward. Gideon caught her again, careful, asking with his body first, giving her space to refuse. "Don't," she snapped, and still she leaned into him because there was no other choice. "I'm going to lift you," he said, blunt. "If you'd rather crawl, I'll walk beside you. But you're not staying here where they can find you." Her eyes widened at the word "they." He didn't need to look back at the ridge to know she understood exactly who he meant. Soledad's throat worked. "They marked me." He glanced at her cheek, again the black smear shaped like a crook crow's wing, or handprint gone wrong. Up close it wasn't paint. It was charcoal pressed hard into her skin, mixed with something greasy to make it stay. "Who?" Gideon asked. She stared over his shoulder, as if saying the names might summon them. Men from the town, men from the big ranch. Men with badges and men without. Gideon felt his stomach turn heavy. Badges meant the law or men pretending to be it. "So you were hung because you stole?" he asked, watching her face. Saudet's lips curled, not in humor. "Because I saw." That was all she gave. Gideon's mind clicked through choices as fast as he could breathe. If he left her, she'd die. If he took her, the kind of men who used rope and charcoal would come to his place with more rope. He thought of the line he'd always lived by, "Don't invite trouble home." Then he looked at her wrists, at the way she kept her chin lifted even while swaying, at the way she tried to fight him with a splinter because pride was the last thing they hadn't stolen. His chest tightened. "Hold on to me," he said. She hesitated. He met her gaze. "Your choice." A long beat. Then her fingers, cold and trembling, curled into the fabric at his shoulder. Gideon bent, slid one arm behind her knees and one across her back, and lifted her like she weighed nothing at all. She stiffened as if she'd rather bite her own tongue off than be carried, but she didn't fight him. Not yet. He moved fast. Not running made panic, and panic made mistakes. He walked with purpose across the scrub and the hard ground, angling away from the ridge, toward the line of cottonwoods that marked the creek and the narrow cut that led back to his ranch. Soledad's head dropped against his chest for a second. He stopped. "You feint on me, and you'll fall." "You want me to set you down?" Her eyes snapped open, insulted by her own weakness. "No." "All right." He carried her through the cottonwoods and into the shallow cut. His horse was tied where he'd left it, reins looped, saddle already on, because Gideon did not go far from home without being ready to leave in a hurry. When he lowered Soledad beside the horse, she swayed again. Her hand shot out to the saddle horn. She braced, breathing hard. "I can ride," she said, as if daring him to doubt it. "I believe you," Gideon answered. "But can you climb?" Soledad's eyes narrowed. Pride didn't let her answer. Gideon stepped back. "I'll turn away. You climb if you can. If you can't, you tell me where you want my hands." That earned him another stare sharp, measuring, new. He turned his back. Behind him he heard the soft scrape of boots, the grunt of effort, and a hiss as pain bit down. Silence followed. Gideon waited. Finally, Soledad's voice came thin. "Under my arm. Not my waist." He turned just enough to see her reaching for the stirrup with a leg that wouldn't lift high. Her face was set in stubborn stone. "Under your arm," he repeated. He stepped in, slid his hand beneath her upper arm where she'd indicated, and lifted in one smooth motion. She pressed her teeth together, refusing to show him how much it hurt. Gideon set her on the saddle, as if placing a fragile rifle on a table, careful, respectful. She adjusted herself with a grimace. "If you die because of me," she said, "that will be your own foolishness." Gideon swung into the saddle behind her, leaving space between their bodies so she didn't feel trapped. "I've been called worse than foolish." He clicked his tongue. The horse moved. They rode hard back toward his place, not reckless, but fast enough that the land blurred at the edges. Soledad held the saddle horn with white knuckles. Her shoulders stayed straight. Only the small tremor in her hands betrayed how close she was to breaking. Gideon kept his eyes sweeping left, right, behind. He listened for hoofbeats that didn't belong to them. When his ranch finally came into view, low house, barn, corrals, the water trough glittering, his pulse didn't ease. Safety was a word other men used. Gideon trusted only distance and preparation. He brought the horse to a stop behind the barn where the ground dipped. It wasn't hiding, not really, but it kept them out of sight from the main approach. Soledad looked around with quick, hungry attention. "You live alone." Gideon swung down. "Most days." "That means no witnesses," she said, and there was steel in it. Gideon met her stare. "That means no one here will sell you for a drink." Her nostrils flared. She didn't know whether to believe him. He stepped to her side. "Same thing as before. You climb down if you can. If you can't, you tell me." She tried. Her leg buckled. She swallowed pride so hard Gideon saw it move in her throat. "Under my arm." He lifted her down again and guided her toward the house with his body angled so she could keep her distance. He didn't reach for her unless she leaned first. Inside, the room was plain. Table, chair, stove, shelves with tins. Nothing worth stealing. Everything worth living. Soledad's gaze swept it like she expected hidden men to step out. "No one's here," Gideon said. "Everyone says that," she murmured. He led her to the table and pulled out a chair. "Sit." She hesitated, then did slowly, testing the chair like it might betray her. Gideon filled a basin with water and set it on the table. He laid out a clean cloth and a small jar of salve. Soledad watched his hands. "I'm going to look at the cut on your chest," he said. "I won't touch you without you saying yes." Her mouth tightened. "I don't want your pity." "It's not pity," he said, and he surprised himself with how certain it sounded. "It's work. Same as mending a fence before the cattle run out." She stared. He held her gaze. "Yes or no?" A long beat. Soledad breathed out through her nose. "Yes, but fast." Gideon nodded. "Fast." He moved to her side, careful not to loom. The tear in her blouse was already wide enough that he could see the wound without pulling fabric. It wasn't deep, but it had been cut with something dirty. Infection would kill her slower than a rope. He cleaned it with the cloth, gentle. She hissed once, and Gideon paused. "Too much?" he asked. "Keep going," she said, harsh. "I've had worse." He didn't ask when. He didn't ask who. He dabbed salve onto the cut. Her muscles tightened under his touch. When he stepped back, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. "Eat," Gideon said. He ladled stew into a bowl, beans, dried meat, a little onion. He set it on the table and placed a spoon beside it. Soledad's eyes flicked to the spoon, then to Gideon. "No knife. If you want one, I'll give you one." She didn't answer. Gideon turned and pulled a small knife from a drawer. He placed it on the table handle first, then stepped away. Soledad's gaze followed it like a hungry thing. "You won't hurt me," Gideon said. Her laugh was a dry scrape. "You can't promise what you don't control." He nodded once. "Then I promise what I do control. I won't be the one to hurt you." She picked up the spoon and ate 3 bites, like she was afraid the food would vanish if she didn't claim it fast. The 4th bite slowed. Her shoulders softened, just a fraction. Gideon leaned against the counter, watching her without staring. After a moment, she spoke around a mouthful. "They will come." "I figured," Gideon said. Soledad swallowed. "Not just come. They will bring the law. They will bring paper. They will bring men who smile while they hang you." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Tell me about the mark." She touched her cheek with 2 fingers, as if the charcoal was hot. "It means I am already dead. They put it on people they don't want to chase. It tells everyone. It tells the whole country that whoever brings me back gets paid, or praised, or forgiven." "Forgiven for what?" Gideon asked. Soledad's eyes narrowed. "For killing the right kind of person." Gideon felt something old and bitter rise in him. "Who did it?" he asked again. Soledad looked down at her bowl, then up. Merrin Sloane? The name landed like a hammer. Gideon had heard it his whole life in this territory. Slade ran the biggest cattle outfit for 50 miles. He owned land on land on land, and he owned men the same way, by debt, by fear, by hunger. "Slade sent men onto my land," Gideon said. Soledad's mouth twisted. "Slade sends men wherever he wants. The sheriff acts like his shadow." Gideon's eyes went to the window, toward the road that led to town, toward trouble. Soledad watched him like she could see the turning gears inside his skull. "If you give me back," she said quietly, "they might let you live." Gideon looked at her. "Might. It would be smart." She pressed. "Smart men live longer." Gideon's voice went flat. "Smart men die old and clean, and no one remembers their names." Soledad blinked at that. He pushed off the counter. "Finish eating." He crossed the room and pulled a long rifle from the rack. He checked it, then set it back. Not because he wanted violence, but because he refused to be surprised. Soldad Spoon paused mid-her. "You will fight them?" Gideon met her eyes. "I don't know yet. That is a lie," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. He walked to the shelf and took down a jar of coffee. His hands were steady, but his thoughts weren't. He had lived by rules, because rules were the only things that kept a lone man alive. Don't owe. Don't borrow. Don't meddle in town business. Don't pick fights you can't finish. But he also had one rule. He'd never broken one rule that had cost him more than he liked to remember. Don't leave a person to die if you can stop it. He poured coffee into a tin cup and slid it to Soldad. She stared at it. "You feed me. You patch me. You arm yourself. And you still pretend you don't know." Gideon's gaze drifted to her wrists again. "If I fight them," he said, "it has to mean something. Not just noise and blood. I don't throw my life away for a moment of anger." Soldad's eyes sharpened. "Then you do not fight for me. You fight for yourself." Gideon's throat tightened. He didn't like how true it felt. "So what did you see?" he asked. Soldad's fingers tightened around the cup. "A ledger." Gideon waited. She took a breath and forced the words out like they hurt. "Slade sells cattle. Everyone knows, but he also sells other things." Gideon's chest went still. "Children," she said. The room turned colder without any change in the air. Gideon's voice came low. "Explain." Soldad's eyes went distant, not in a flashback the way story men told them, but in the way a person looks when they're seeing something they can't unsee. "I worked for the agent," she said. "The one who writes papers to say the reservation is peaceful. The one who says the army is kind. He needed someone to speak two tongues, my mother's tongue and yours." Gideon didn't interrupt. "So I translated," she went on. "I listened. And I saw Slade's name on the papers. Money moving like water. Goods moving at night. Wagons that left with flour and returned empty, but the numbers did not match." Gideon's hands curled into fists at his sides. "So I followed," Soldad said. "I was careful. I was quiet. I saw men trade small bodies like they were calves." Gideon's stomach flipped. "So I took the ledger," she finished. "I thought paper could be louder than a gun." Gideon let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "And Slade marked you for death." Soldad's mouth hardened. "Slade marked me so no one would ever do what I did again." Gideon's mind worked fast. A ledger meant proof. Proof meant danger. Proof meant Slade would not stop until every page was ash and every witness was dead. "Where is it?" Gideon asked. Soldad's hand went to the inside of her torn blouse. She pulled out a folded bundle wrapped in oilcloth. The edges were smudged with blood. Gideon stared at it like it might bite. Soldad's eyes stayed on his face. "I didn't come here for rescue," she said. "I came because I ran. I ran until my legs failed. Your land was there. That is all." Gideon stepped closer, slow. "You want me to keep it?" "I want it to live," she said. "If it dies, I die for nothing." Gideon reached out, but stopped short. "May I?" Soldad's gaze flicked to his hand, then back to his eyes. She nodded once. He took the bundle like it was a newborn. The pages inside were cramped with numbers and names. Even at a glance, Gideon recognized enough to feel sick. Townsfolk he'd traded with, men he'd nodded to in the street, names tied to Slade's like rope. "So the sheriff," Gideon murmured. "So the preacher," Soldad said. Gideon looked up. Soldad's eyes were flat and furious. "Men like Slade don't work alone." Gideon's jaw clenched until it ached. "What do you want?" he asked. Soldad's eyes narrowed. "I want to reach my people. I want to put this paper in hands that will not burn it to protect their own." Gideon's mind flicked to the nearest fort, the nearest marshal. Then it flicked away. Paper didn't matter if the man holding it was paid. "There's a circuit judge," Gideon said. "Comes through once a season." Soldad's mouth twisted. He drinks Slade's whiskey. Gideon didn't argue. He thought of the one man in the territory who hated Slade enough to risk his own life. Amos Quaid, the newspaper editor who'd been beaten for printing the wrong truth. The paper in town, Gideon said. Soledad shook her head immediately. Slade will get there first. Gideon's eyes narrowed. Not if we don't give him time. Soledad's stare sharpened on the word we. Gideon felt it, too, that shift, that line he just crossed without meaning to. He wasn't just sheltering her anymore. He was making a plan. He set the ledger bundle down on the table, then walked to the back of the room and pulled up a loose board beneath the shelf. He slid the bundle inside and replaced the board. Soledad watched every movement. Now, Gideon said, you rest. She looked like she wanted to argue. Her body betrayed her. Exhaustion pulled her eyelids heavy. I don't sleep, she said. Everyone sleeps, Gideon replied. Soledad's voice went quiet. Not everyone wakes up. Gideon's chest tightened. He didn't offer her his bed without asking. He pointed to the small cot near the stove. That's yours if you want it. Soledad's eyes flicked to the cot, then to him. And you? I'll sit, Gideon said. She studied him. You'll watch, yes. She held his gaze another long beat, then rose unsteadily and moved to the cot. She lay down without turning her back to him. Her hand stayed near the knife. Gideon sat at the table with his coffee and his rifle within reach, not pointed at her, not pointed at the door, just there like a statement. Time passed in small sounds. The crackle of stove heat, the slow rhythm of Soledad's breathing as it deepened against her will, the distant creak of a barn beam settling. Gideon's mind would not settle. He kept seeing the rope burn. He kept seeing the black mark. He also kept seeing the names in the ledger. Slade, sheriff, preacher, men who smiled while they did evil. Gideon's fingers tapped once on the table, then stilled. A sound came from outside faint far. Hooves. Gideon didn't move at first. He listened. One horse, maybe two. Not a whole posse. Still, his spine went rigid. He rose quietly and crossed the room. He didn't grab his rifle yet. He went to the shelf and took down a lantern, then paused. No, light drew eyes. He set it back. He stepped to the window and angled his body so he could see the approach without exposing his whole face. A rider came down the road at a steady pace, no hurry, no fear. That meant he thought he owned the space. Gideon's jaw tightened. The rider pulled up near the corral and swung down like he'd done it 1,000 times in other men's yards. He wore a badge, deputy. Gideon stepped out onto the porch, not holding a weapon, but not empty-handed either. His hands hung loose. His posture said, I'm not afraid. The deputy's gaze swept the yard. He smiled like an old friend. Dre, he called. Didn't expect you home. Gideon's voice came flat. I live here. The deputy chuckled and sauntered closer. Up close, Gideon recognized him. Lyle Mercer. Sheriff's right hand. A man who'd learned to grin while he threatened. Mercer tipped his hat. Sheriff's got a question. Gideon didn't invite him in. Ask it. Mercer's smile didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Any strangers passed through your land today? Gideon held his gaze. Rabbits and coyotes. One snake. Mercer laughed again, like Gideon was charming. Come on now. You know what I mean. I know what you mean, Gideon said. I answered what I want to answer. Mercer's smile thinned. We're looking for a woman. Gideon didn't blink. There are lots of women in the territory. Mercer stepped closer until he was standing at the bottom step. Apache woman. Gideon felt the word like spit on his boots. Mercer kept talking, voice still light. Thief, murderer, Slade's missing property. Sheriff wants her brought in before sundown. Gideon's hands stayed loose at his sides. He forced his breathing steady. You come to my place alone, Gideon said. That means you're either brave or stupid, Mercer chuckled. or I don't think you're the kind of man to hide a murderer. Gideon leaned forward just enough that Mercer's smile faltered. Careful, he said. You're standing on my steps. Mercer's eyes flicked past him, toward the inside of the house. Mind if I take a look? No, Gideon said. Mercer's grin returned. No, you don't mind? No, Gideon repeated, voice colder. You don't take a look. Mercer's jaw tightened. Sheriff's authority ends where my land begins, Gideon cut in. Unless you've got a warrant. And unless that warrant comes from a judge who isn't on Slade's payroll. Mercer's eyes narrowed at the name. You watch your mouth. Gideon stepped down one stair. The space between them shrank. Mercer's hand drifted toward his holster slow, casual, meant to be noticed. Gideon didn't reach for a gun. He reached for truth. You tell the sheriff, Gideon said, that if he wants to search my house, he comes here himself. And he brings paper that isn't written in fear. Mercer's smile vanished. Slade's offering $50 for her. Gideon's face stayed still. Inside, something hot twisted. 50, Mercer added, leaning in, for her alive. More if she tries to run. You could use money, Dre. You're a lone man out here. Fence is leaning on your west line. Cattle prices are down. Gideon's voice went low. You've been counting my boards? Mercer shrugged. A man notices. Gideon held his gaze. A man like you notices, because a man like you looks for weakness. Mercer's eyes sharpened. You saying I'm weak? Gideon's mouth curved, just a fraction. I'm saying you came alone. That means you already know you can't take what you want by force. Mercer's nostrils flared. From inside the house, a faint soundwood creaking. Not loud, not obvious. Gideon's pulse jumped. Soldad, Gideon didn't turn his head. He didn't give Mercer anything to read. Mercer lifted his chin toward the door. What was that? Stove settling, Gideon said. Mercer's eyes narrowed. Mind if I step inside and make sure? Gideon's voice stayed even. You step inside, Mercer, and you don't leave. Mercer's gaze hardened. You threatening a deputy? I'm warning a man, Gideon replied. Badge doesn't make you bulletproof. Mercer's hand rested on his holster now, fingers curled like a promise. Gideon held the deputy's eyes and spoke slow. Go back to town. Mercer's smile flashed ugly. You've changed, Dre. Gideon didn't answer. Mercer leaned closer. Or maybe you haven't. Maybe you're still the same man who used to scout for the army. Used to know where the Apache camps were. Used to lead men right to them. The words hit Gideon like a slap. He kept his face still, but his gut clenched. Mercer watched him like a gambler watching a card flip. You don't want folks remembering that, do you? Gideon's voice came low and dangerous. You don't want folks remembering what you did to the Morales boy behind the saloon, do you? Mercer froze. Gideon held him there with a stare. We can both play that game. Mercer's jaw worked. He spat to the side, then backed away one step. This isn't over, Mercer said. Gideon's voice stayed flat. It never is. Mercer swung into his saddle with hard movements and rode off without a goodbye. Gideon didn't exhale until the deputy's dust had thinned into the horizon. Then he turned and went back inside. Soledad was sitting upright on the cot, awake. A knife was in her hand. Gideon stopped a few feet away. I told him no. Soledad's eyes were wide, sharp. He knows. He suspects, Gideon corrected. That is enough, Soledad said. Gideon nodded once. We move. Soledad's chin lifted. Where? Gideon's mind raced. He could take her to the mountains, to the river, to any place the law didn't bother to chase. But running with the ledger meant dragging danger through every town, every camp, every innocent place. You said you wanted to live, Gideon said. Yes. Then we don't just hide, Gideon replied. We deliver. Soledad's eyes narrowed. To whom? Gideon hesitated, because saying it out loud made it real. Amos Quaid, newspaper man. Soledad's mouth tightened. Paper men die. So do quiet women, Gideon said. That landed. Soledad's gaze flicked away for a second, then back. He will print it? He hates Slade, Gideon said, and he hates the sheriff. If he sees names, he'll print them. He'll do it out of spite, if nothing else. Soledad's eyes went hard. Spite is not justice. No, Gideon agreed. But it starts fires. Soledad's fingers tightened on the knife. Slade will burn the newspaper. Gideon's voice stayed quiet. Then we make it hard for him. Soledad studied him. You speak like a man who has done this before. Gideon's jaw tightened. I speak like a man who knows what happens when you don't. Soledad's gaze lingered on his face, searching for the shape of his guilt. Gideon didn't offer it. Not now. There wasn't time. He crossed the room and pulled the oilcloth bundle from beneath the board. You can carry it if you want, he said. Or I can. Your choice. Soledad stared at it. Then she shook her head. You carry it. If I fall, it falls. Gideon nodded and slid it into his jacket. He moved fast now, packing food, filling canteens, checking the saddle straps. Soledad rose from the cot and swayed, but she forced herself upright. You can't ride hard, Gideon said. I can ride, she snapped. Gideon met her eyes. I believe you, but your wound will open if we gallop like fools. Soledad's jaw clenched. Then what? Gideon's mind flicked to the road. To Mercer, riding back with a story. To the sheriff gathering men. To Slade, smiling while he counted money. We leave now, Gideon said. Quiet, back route. Through the arroyo. Soledad nodded once. They stepped outside and moved behind the barn again, staying low where the ground dipped. Gideon stopped short. Soledad followed his gaze. In the dirt near the corral, fresh hoofprints newer than Mercer's. More than one. Gideon's pulse punched. So they already sent more, Soledad whispered. Gideon's eyes swept the yard, a fence line, the barn. Nothing moved. Then he heard voices, faint, coming from the road. Men talking, confident. Not one deputy, a posse. Gideon's mind snapped into motion. He turned to Soledad, voice low. There's a cellar hatch under the rug inside. You get down there. No sound. Soledad's eyes flashed insult. I will not hide like... You will if you want to live, Gideon cut in. She froze. Gideon held her gaze. Your choice. But if they see you, they hang you here, and then they burn my house and call it law. Soledad's breathing went tight. She hated it, but she understood. She nodded once. Go, Gideon said. She moved fast, despite pain, slipping inside. Gideon walked to the front of the house and stepped onto the porch again, forcing his body loose, his face calm. Down the road, riders approached 5, maybe 6. Sheriff Rafe Quillen at the front, hat brim low, gun belt heavy. Vernon Slade beside him on a tall chestnut horse, looking like a man riding to church. Behind them, 2 of Slade's hands with rifles, and a man in a neat coat Gideon recognized as the town preacher. Gideon's stomach went cold. Slade's eyes lifted and met Gideon's from a distance. Slade smiled. The posse reined in at the edge of Gideon's yard, like they owned it. Sheriff Cullen tipped his hat without warmth. Dre. Gideon nodded once. Sheriff. Slade didn't tip anything. He looked Gideon up and down like Gideon was livestock. Heard you found something. Gideon's voice stayed even. Heard wrong. Sheriff Quillen swung down, boots thudding. He walked toward the porch with the slow confidence of a man who'd never been told no. Deputy Mercer says you got hostile, the sheriff said. Gideon leaned against the porch post. Mercer got curious. The sheriff's gaze sharpened. Curiosity is what keeps the territory safe. Gideon's mouth went flat. Curiosity is what gets men shot when they trespass. A tense hush. Slade dismounted with lazy grace and stepped forward. No need for threats, he drawled. We're all civilized men here. Gideon's eyes flicked to Slade's hands. Clean, soft, the hands of a man who paid others to do his cruelty. The preacher cleared his throat behind them, as if this was a gathering of souls and not wolves. Sheriff Quillen lifted a folded paper. "We have authority to search your property for a fugitive," he said. Gideon didn't move. "From what judge?" Quillen's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to question the law." Gideon's voice stayed calm. "I do when the law rides with Vernon Slade." Slade's smile didn't change, but something dark flickered in his eyes. "Careful, Dre. Men who speak like that end up lonely." Gideon's gaze held. "I already am." Sheriff Quillen stepped closer to the porch. "Stand aside." Gideon didn't. Slade's voice went light, almost kind. "Gideon, don't make this hard. That woman is dangerous. She killed a man." Gideon's pulse hit his throat. He forced his voice steady. "Who?" Slade's smile widened. "A ranch hand, good boy. Family's grieving." Gideon watched Slade's face, reading for truth. He saw none. Sheriff Quillen raised his chin toward the house. "We're coming in." Gideon's voice dropped. "You step inside without a real warrant, and you're not leaving with the same number of men you brought." One of Slade's hands shifted his rifle. Gideon's heartbeat thudded. He didn't reach for his own gun, not yet. Not unless they forced him. Slade sighed, like Gideon was a disappointment. "You always did have a hero's streak." Gideon's jaw clenched. Slade's eyes gleamed. "Tell me, Dre, is it true what they say? That you used to guide the army right to Apache camps?" Gideon felt the air leave his lungs. The sheriff's gaze sharpened. The posse leaned in, hungry for scandal. Slade took one more step toward the porch, voice turning soft enough to be poison. "Because if you did, if you have that kind of blood on your hands, then hiding an Apache woman now would look less like mercy and more like—" He paused. "Guilt," Slade finished. Gideon's fingers curled around the porch post until the wood groaned. Inside the house, beneath the rug, Soledad listened in the dark breath held, knife tight. Gideon forced his voice level. "Say what you came to say," Slade smiled. "I came to take what's mine." Gideon's stomach turned. "People aren't property." Slade's eyes went flat. "In this territory, they are," the preacher murmured. "Now, Vernon." Slade didn't look at him. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch. Coins clinked. "You like living alone," Slade said. "I respect that. Here's $50. You tell us where she is, and we leave you to your quiet." Gideon stared at the pouch like it was filth. Sheriff Quillen's voice went hard. "You refuse lawful authority, Dre. You're harboring a fugitive. That makes you an accomplice." Gideon's eyes lifted to the sheriff. "And that makes you a coward." The sheriff's face darkened. Slade sighed again. "All right," he said, like a man deciding to stop being patient. "If you won't take money, you'll take fear." He nodded once. One of his hands stepped forward and tossed something onto the porch steps. A length of rope. Gideon's throat tightened. Slade's voice stayed calm. "We don't want trouble, Gideon, but we will have her. And if we don't get her, we'll make an example of you. We'll burn your barn. We'll shoot your cattle. We'll leave you alive just long enough to watch." Gideon's blood went hot. He heard, faint beneath the floor, the scrape of something shifting. Soledad. Slade's eyes flicked, as if he'd heard it too. Sheriff Quillen lifted his hand. "Men," he said. They started forward. Gideon's hand moved fast, finally to the rifle, leaning behind the porch post. He brought it up. Slade's smile widened, like he'd been waiting for this. "Do it," Slade whispered. "Shoot the law. Prove what you are." Gideon's finger tightened on the trigger. Then, from inside, a voice low, steady, furious rose out of the house. "I am not yours," Soledad said. The floorboard hatch lifted. She stepped into the doorway, pale but upright, knife in one hand, Gideon's discarded pistol in the other. Every man in the yard went still. Slade's eyes lit with satisfaction. "So there you are," he said. Soledad's gaze locked on him like a spear. "You marked me," she said. "Now everyone will see what you are." Sheriff Quillen barked. "Drop it." Soledad didn't. Gideon's heart hammered. "Soledad." Her eyes flicked to Gideon just once. A decision passed between them without words. Then Slade's hand moved. A gun cleared leather. The crack of the first shot split the yard. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The shot blew the porch post apart beside Gideon's shoulder wood and dust ripping outward. He dropped low on instinct, rifle rising as splinters stung his cheek. Soledad stood in the doorway, pale and upright, a pistol held with both hands. She aimed straight at Vernon Slade, like the man was a sickness she could finally name. "Drop it." Sheriff Quillen barked, but his voice sounded thin now. Slade smiled, calm, certain. He had ridden into Gideon's yard like it belonged to him already. "Put that down, girl," Slade said softly. "You're making this worse." Soledad's voice carried clean over the yard. "You made it worse when you started buying people." One of Slade's hands lifted a rifle toward her. Gideon fired first fast and controlled aiming for the man's shoulder, not his chest. The rifleman yelped and staggered back into the others, his weapon dipping uselessly. Gideon didn't need death. He needed seconds. The posse surged. Mercer drew. A bullet snapped past Gideon's ear and bit into the porch behind him. Back inside. Gideon shouted, "Now!" Soledad didn't move. Then Slade's voice slid through the chaos. "Shoot her if you must," he said. "Just don't ruin her face." Soledad's pupils tightened. She stepped back at last, slow and proud, and vanished into the house. Gideon slid behind the water trough, fired into the dirt near Slade's chestnut, and the horse reared, panicked. Men cursed, grabbed reins, stumbled over each other. Gideon sprinted around the barn. He yanked the corral latch and slapped the nearest horse hard across the rump. 3 animals burst into the yard in a wild thunder of hooves, scattering deputies and ranch hands alike. Chaos was the only thing Slade couldn't buy on command. He cut back toward the kitchen window. Inside, flour hung thick in the air. Soledad had dumped a sack into the stove heat, turning the room into choking white fog. Soledad stood near the back door, pistol still raised, eyes hard. "We leave," Gideon said, ripping the oilcloth bundle from beneath the loose floorboard and shoving it into his jacket. "Quiet route, now. They'll burn your home," she said. "Then it burns," Gideon answered. "Come." They slipped behind the barn and dropped into the shallow dip that hid them from the road. Gideon hauled Soledad up onto the rangy bay and swung behind her, taking the reins. "Hold on," he murmured. "I am holding," she snapped. They rode into the arroyo, the narrow cut swallowing them like a secret. Hoofbeats tightened behind them, pursuit closing. Gideon glanced once. Mercer and one of Slade's men had broken off after them. At the bend where brush thickened and rock rose high, Gideon hauled the bay hard to the side. "Ride," he told Soledad. "Straight through. Don't stop." She jerked her head toward him. "No. If they catch us together, they hang you and call it law," Gideon said. "Choose life." Her lips trembled. Then she swallowed it and kicked the bay forward, disappearing around the bend. Gideon flattened into the brush, rifle ready. Mercer rounded the corner with his pistol out, grinning. Gideon fired once, clean shattering the pistol from Mercer's grip. The weapon spun into the dirt. Mercer screamed, clutching his wrist. The second rider raised his rifle. Gideon shot into the ground under the horse's hooves. The animal bolted sideways, throwing its rider into the brush with a crack and a shout. "Slade's gonna burn everything you own." Gideon stepped close and slammed the rifle butt into Mercer's gut. Mercer folded and hit the dirt. Gideon crouched over him, voice like gravel. "Tell Slade the ledger is gone. And tell him next time I won't aim for hands." He ran. He caught Soledad a quarter-mile later. The bay was still running, her shoulders locked stiff with stubbornness and shock. Gideon vaulted up behind her, breath-tearing, and took the reins without apology. "You could have run," Soledad said, not looking back. "So could you," Gideon rasped. By the time town lights showed faint ahead, Soledad's breathing had gone shallow again. Gideon stopped behind a leaning shed near the creek bed and smeared soot and grease across her cheek and brow until the charcoal mark blurred into ordinary grime. He handed her a spare shawl. "Cover your hair." Soledad wrapped it tight. "You're good at hiding." "I learned it wrong," Gideon said. They moved through back alleys to a narrow building with a faded sign. "Quade's Truth." Gideon rapped twice, then once. A pause, then the lock clicked. Inside, ink and paper and stubborn iron. Gideon laid the oilcloth bundle on the desk. Amos untied it and went still as the names appeared: Slade, sheriff, preacher, men who smiled in daylight and hunted at night. "This," Amos whispered, "this is a hanging list." "It's a buying list," Soledad said. "Children." Amos's face drained. Then it hardened. "If I print this, I die." "If you don't," Soledad replied, "they keep dying." Amos stared at her a beat, then nodded once. "All right. Help me." They worked fast. Amos set type with shaking hands. Gideon turned the press until his shoulders screamed. Soledad learned the metal letters and laid names with ruthless precision, correcting Amos when he faltered. The first broadside came out hot and sharp black truth on white paper. "Now we move it," Amos said. "Runners," Gideon replied. "Silas Dent, blacksmith." Amos grabbed a sack of broadsides. "And I've got a boy. Finn. He runs errands. Nobody notices him." Soledad tightened her shawl. "My people are camped near the river. They can carry this farther than your streets." Gideon met her eyes and nodded. "We split." He offered his boot knife to Soledad handle first. "Not because you can't fight," he said quietly. "Because I don't want you empty-handed." She took it. Gideon ran to the forge. Silas Dent opened the door with a scowl and went white when he read the broadside. "My boy's name," Silas whispered. Gideon's throat tightened. "Then help me move the truth." Silas didn't hesitate. He pounded on doors, dragged men into the night, shoved paper into shaking hands, and dared them to keep breathing like cowards. Broadside after broadside vanished into coats and saddlebags. When Gideon turned back toward Quade's office, he saw the glow first orange licking the rooftops. Smoke rolled over the street. Slade had found it. A crowd gathered deputies, Slade's hands, drunks eager for violence. Sheriff Quillen held a broadside in his fist, face purple with rage. Slade stood beside him, calm, and the preacher hovered behind like a guilty shadow. "Lies!" Quillen shouted. "Treason. Anyone caught distributing this will be jailed." Slade's voice went smooth as sermon. "We won't let a bitter printer poison this decent town." Miss Hattie shouted from the edge, shaking with fury. "My brother's name is on that paper." People murmured, scared, but listening. Gideon pushed forward. "Quillen," he called. "Explain why your name is there." Quillen snapped. "Arrest him." Slade's smile widened. "Tell them, Gideon," Slade said. "Tell them about the camps you led soldiers to." The street leaned in. "It's true," Gideon said. Murmurs surged. "I pointed," Gideon went on. "Men died because I pointed. I can't undo it. But I can stop this before another child is sold like livestock." Silence fell. Then Slade nodded, and two of his men shoved torches into Quade's office. Flame climbed. Amos burst into the doorway, ink smeared across his face. A deputy grabbed him. Gideon lunged and yanked Amos back from the burning wall. "Live first," Gideon snapped. "Carry the truth." Gunfire cracked. The crowd screamed and scattered. From the far end of the street, hoofbeats thundered. Soledad appeared shawl-tight, soot on her face, and behind her rode 3 Apache hunters, silent and watchful. The sight froze the street in a new kind of fear. Soledad lifted a stack of broadsides high. "Too late," she called. "You can burn one shop. You cannot burn every mouth." Sheriff Quillen drew his gun, hands shaking. "Drop it." Soledad raised her pistol. "You shoot me, and you prove every word." Quillen's eyes flicked to Slade like a dog seeking its master. Slade made his move, snatched a pistol from the ground, and swung it toward Miss Hattie like she was a lesson. Soledad fired. The bullet snapped Slade's hand sideways, knocking the gun from his grip. Slade hissed, clutching his hand, rage cracking his mask. The street erupted. Slade's men raised rifles. Hunters lifted their weapons. The crowd ran screaming. Gideon hauled Amos into an alley as the building behind them became a furnace. Smoke rolled. Heat slapped Gideon's back. Amos made a sound like a man watching his own heart burn. They fled through the churchyard and into back lanes toward the stable. The older hunter Taza moved with them, like a blade that had decided to protect. At the stable door, Mercer appeared again, bruised and wild, pistol raised with his good hand. "Found you," he snarled. Taza fired once. Mercer's hat flew off. Mercer stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, screaming. Deputies behind him surged. No one stayed to finish him. They burst out on stolen horses and ran for the river line, cottonwoods swallowing them. They didn't stop until the creek's sound covered their breathing. Gideon pulled them into the shadow of cottonwoods and finally let the stolen horses walk, foam clinging to their mouths. Amos clutched the sack of broadsides like a wounded child. "My press," he kept whispering, as if saying it might pull the building back from the fire. Gideon listened, boots, hooves, and heard only the river and his own heartbeat. "Your press printed truth," he said. That's what mattered. Soledad's hand tightened on her side. Blood seeped through her shirt again, dark and stubborn. Gideon tore a strip from his own sleeve, pressed it to her wound, and held it there without asking permission. She flinched once, then held still. Jaw set like pain was just another enemy to starve. "You're bleeding," he said. "So are you," she replied, eyes flicking to the smear on his forearm. A rider's lantern bobbed faintly on the far bank deputies searching the river line. Gideon shoved Amos and Soledad lower into the brush. The lantern drifted past, the deputy's voice carrying, "Slade wants him alive." "Alive!" Soledad went rigid at the word alive, as if she'd heard it used like a chain before. When the lantern faded, Gideon exhaled. "Finn," he said suddenly. "Where's the boy?" Amos blinked, remembering. He was supposed to run the wire office. A small shape slipped through the trees, breath ragged, eyes shining with fear and pride. Finn thrust a telegraph slip at Amos. "Sent him," he whispered. "Marshal Kane, 2 towns. Anyone with a badge bigger than Quillen's." Amos swallowed hard, hands trembling as he read. "Good," he managed. Then softer. "You did good, son." Finn's chin lifted like that was the first time anyone had ever said it. Gideon crouched to Finn's level. "Now you disappear," he said. "You go home. You lock the door. And if someone knocks, you don't breathe." Finn nodded, then hesitated. "They're gonna come burn more," he whispered. "So we move faster," Gideon said. "Go." Finn ran, vanishing into the dark like a prayer the town didn't deserve. The camp waited fires low, women alert, children watching from blankets. Soledad slid down and nearly collapsed into a strong older woman's arms. Molly. Home hit her like a blow. Molly's eyes found Gideon cold, assessing. Soledad spoke to Molly in a low rush, the words sharp with urgency. Molly listened without blinking, then answered in a tone that sounded like a knife being sharpened. The elders gathered men and women faces lit by fire, eyes measuring Gideon as if weighing whether he was poison or tool. Soledad translated when they demanded it. "They say your kind always comes with soldiers," she said. "And soldiers always come with graves." Gideon's throat tightened. He looked at the children watching from blankets, too quiet, too still. "I won't bring soldiers here," he said. "I brought paper." A murmur moved through the circle at that. An elder man pointed to Gideon's rifle. Soledad's voice went colder. "He asks if you'll point again." Gideon forced the old shame down. "Not at women running," he said. "Not at children hiding. If I point now, it's at the men who sell them." Molly stared at him a long time. Then she stepped closer and tapped 2 fingers against Gideon's chest hard, not gentle. Soledad translated her words, quieter. "She says if you lie, the river will take your bones." Gideon nodded once. "Fair." Soledad's gaze shifted toward the dark line of canyon country. "Dry Falls," she said again, and this time the name sounded like a door opening. Soledad spoke rapidly in her tongue. Gideon caught only the edges: Slade, children, ledger, rope, fire. An elder listened, face carved from patience. He asked a question. Soledad translated. "He asks why you brought trouble to our door." Gideon swallowed. "Because trouble was already walking toward your children," he said. "I just finally saw it." Another elder woman leaned forward, eyes sharp. Soledad listened and turned back. "She asks what you want." Gideon looked at the small faces watching. "I want them back," he said. "All of them." Soledad's gaze sharpened. "Dry Falls Canyon," she said. "Slade's wagons go there at night. One way in, one way out." Amos, still coughing smoke, lifted his head. "If we find the children, then the town can't pretend," Soledad finished. Amos swore and looked toward the dark beyond the cottonwoods. "Finn," he rasped. "I need Finn." The elder spoke. Taza listened, then nodded once decision. Soledad translated. "They will guide us," she said, "but you follow." "Not lead." Gideon nodded. Following was the first honest thing he could do. They moved before dawn, no speeches, just bodies slipping through darkness. Gideon rode with Soledad and Taza, Amos behind, hunters flanking. Soledad's pain showed in the tightness of her mouth, but she didn't complain. Dry Falls came into view as the sky paled. 2 guards watched the canyon mouth. Wagon ruts cut the dirt fresh. They took the guards without blood, Gideon's forearm across one throat, Soledad's knife to the other's ribs, Taza's hands wrenching rifles away. The second guard started to speak half-warning, half-plea eyes fixed on Soledad's cheek, where the old charcoal mark hid the brand. He swallowed and blurted, "Marked one," like it was a curse and a claim in the same breath. As if summoned, dust rose on the horizon fast riders. Sheriff Quillen appeared with Vernon Slade beside him, and tied to their saddles, 3 women bruised and gagged. Miss Hattie among them, eyes wide with terror. Slade's hand was bandaged, his face tight with rage at having been bitten in public. Slade called out, smiling again, "Marshal, good of you to come." Kane's voice went flat. "Slade, you're under arrest." "For what?" Slade asked, offended. "For owning land?" "For trafficking children," Kane said. Slade shrugged and nodded toward the hostages. "You want them alive," he said. "You let me leave." Kane's eyes flicked to the children behind the campfires, small shapes huddled close to the women, and something hard settled in his face. He raised his voice, not for Slade, but for every man listening on both sides. "You ride out, you die," he said. "You keep hostages, you hang." Slade laughed softly. "Big words," he replied. "But you're here, Marshal. That means you want the women breathing more than you want me punished." Quillen's jaw worked. Sweat ran down his temple. Gideon saw the sheriff's eyes dart toward one hostage in particular, an older woman with silver hair, like she was the leash Slade held tightest. Slade tilted his pistol toward that woman's head, casual as a man pointing at a fence post. "Make it simple," he said. "Step aside." The hostage shook, eyes wide, but she didn't sob. She stared straight at Soledad, like she was begging her not to blink. Gideon's stomach twisted. Slade wasn't bargaining. He was forcing the world to choose who is allowed to live. Soledad stepped forward, voice like steel. "You cannot hide behind them." Slade's eyes glittered. "I'm teaching." Quillen's hands trembled on his reins. Gideon saw the caller. Gideon leaned toward Kane. "Keep him talking," he murmured. "I can get behind the ridge." Soledad's hand caught Gideon's sleeve. "I go too." Gideon nodded once. "Stay low." They slipped into brush, circling the ridge while Kane spoke loud and steady, trading words for seconds. From behind the rocks, Gideon sighted on the knot at Hattie's wrists. His finger tightened. The shot snapped the rope clean. Hattie ripped her gag free and screamed. Slade spun, hand going for his gun. Soledad fired at the sheriff's reins, spooking the horse sideways and breaking the line. Kane's men surged forward. Soledad ran to the hostages, cutting ropes, yanking gags free. "Run," she hissed, shoving them toward cottonwoods. Slade roared and spurred toward Gideon like an animal finally unchained. His bandaged hand raised a gun, eyes bright with hate. "You think you're clean now?" Slade spat at Gideon. "You think saving a savage makes you a saint?" Gideon lifted his rifle. "I'm not clean," he said. "I'm done." Slade fired. The bullet slammed into Gideon's shoulder. Pain exploded. His rifle dipped. His knees threatened. Soledad stepped in front of him. Slade hissed at her. "Do it. Prove what you are." Soledad's face went still. "You do not get to name me," she said. She fired. Slade toppled from the saddle and hit the dirt hard, breath leaving him in one ugly rush. Silence crashed over the ridge. Sheriff Quillen stared at Slade's body, gray-faced, shaking. Kane's men swarmed, guns trained, voices snapping orders. "Quillen," Kane shouted. "Drop it." Quillen's pistol fell into the dirt. He slid off his horse like a man whose bones had turned to ash. As irons clicked around his wrists, Quillen whispered, voice ruined, "He said he'd kill my boy." Fear explained the caller. It didn't forgive rope. Kane crouched by Slade, checked, then stood, face hard. "He's alive," Kane said. "Barely." Gideon tried to breathe through the fire in his shoulder. His vision swam. Soledad caught him as he sagged, holding him upright with hands that shook from adrenaline and grief and something like relief. "You should let me fall," Gideon rasped. Soledad's voice came fierce and quiet. "Everyone lets people fall," she said. "I'm tired of it." They brought Gideon down to the camp. Molly cleaned his wound without gentleness, muttering words that sounded like curses and care woven together. Soledad snapped at Gideon to stay still. Gideon obeyed. Amos sat near the fire with the ledger open, eyes red but shining. "They burned my shop," he whispered. "But the telegrams are out. The papers have the names. Slade can't stuff this back in the dark." Kane's gaze swept the children sleeping full for the first time in too long. "We move at first light," he said. "Slade goes to a judge he can't buy. Quillen, too. Anyone named will answer." Kane looked down at Gideon's bandaged shoulder. "You'll testify," he said, not a request, a weight. "You put your name on that ledger when you stole it. Now you put your name on the record." Gideon felt the old instinct to run, to vanish into land and silence. He forced himself to meet the marshal's eyes. "I'll stand," he said, "even if the whole town spits." Soledad heard him and dipped her chin once. Molly snorted, then tossed Gideon a cup of bitter tea. "Live," she muttered. "So you can speak." Soledad lifted her chin. "And the children?" "They go home," Kane said. "And if any buyer tries again, he goes in chains." Soledad didn't nod, but she didn't argue. Later, when the camp quieted and the river ran steady, Soledad sat beside Gideon's cot. Firelight painted her cheek. Soot hid the mark, but it didn't erase what it meant. "You will lose everything," she said. Gideon swallowed. In the distance, smoke still hung faint. "Maybe," he answered. "You already lost things," Soledad said. "Long before me." "I did?" Gideon said. Soledad stared into the flames, then spoke with hard honesty. "I will not forgive you for what you did." "I know," Gideon said. "But I will not pretend you are the same man," she added, voice tight. "Not after today." Pain and gratitude tangled until Gideon couldn't separate them. She stood. "I go with my people." "You should," Gideon replied, forcing steadiness into his voice. At the edge of the firelight, she set a folded broadside near his cot, the ink smudged where her fingers had held too long. "I keep one," she said, "so I remember what paper can do." "And the rest?" Gideon asked. Soledad's gaze lifted to the dark beyond the cottonwoods. "The rest will travel," she said, "to camps, to towns, to places men like Slade never cared to look." She turned to leave, then stopped without facing him. "If you rebuild," she said, voice low, "build with your hands open, not pointing." Gideon's throat tightened. "Yes," he rasped. Soledad walked into the dark where her people waited, leaving Gideon with the river's steady sound and the strange, painful feeling of a beginning. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.